All right, good talk. Okay, this is really the final. This is really the final Hilchos Muktza Shir. Next week, Bez Hashem, I won't be around, and the week after I will be, Bez Hashem, and then the week after that, winter vacation, I won't be around. So I think we'll just finish up Muktza, which tonight really is the most important of all the Muktza shiurim. But so we'll just finish off tonight. I think maybe the week after we'll review the entire Hilchos Muktza, and then we're going to need to take some sort of vote or what the next subject should be. I don't know exactly how we'll do that, but yeah, okay, we'll have to figure that out. Okay, so basically tonight we're going to discuss Bez Hashem all the ways you're allowed to move Muktza. Okay, which isn't very important because a lot of times it causes a lot of stress where, oh, it's Muktza, I can't move it, what am I going to do? There's people coming over and I'm embarrassed, and et cetera, et cetera. Bottom line is that all Muktzas are allowed to be moved if you do it correctly. And right, so it gets that's the way it gets complicated. Oh, so yeah, Texas, and Mrs. Jacobs just posted that if you can put your emails, or maybe Mrs. Jacobs, if you could put your email and people can email you privately if they don't want to put their email on here, so that we can maybe make some sort of central email, and you send. She just posted ejacobs@hank.org, and if everybody sends their information, and thank you for doing this, so then we'll be able to, I can send out my notes. Somebody asked last night for the notes. I'm trying to make some clear notes, but it's not so easy to make Hilchos Muktza clear on a piece of paper is not so simple. So if you can send, let's just post it here again. ejacobs, what was it? ejacobs@hank.org. So that's right, at hank.org. So then that would be we'd be able to have communication like that. Okay, again, I forgot we're doing the Shir Le'inu Nishmas, Yehuda Shimon Zechar L'Bracha Ben Yeshua Yosef Moshe, and Aryeh Leib Zechar L'Bracha Ben Yeshua Adam Zalman and Ashav Shav and Aliyah. Okay, so getting back to what we're saying, so all Muktzas are allowed to be moved if you do it correctly, but you just have to know the different levels of Muktza and then how they're supposed to be moved, and then you can know exactly how to go about moving Muktza. So the first way we've already discussed, which is anything that's a utensil can be moved if you move it for the right reasons, right? I think we even mentioned it last week because it comes up a lot. So anything that's a utensil can be moved either because you need the utensil, right? It can either move, like again, the classic case is the hammer. So even though a hammer is Muktza, but if you needed to move that hammer because you needed to break open a nut, so that would be okay. That's one. That's called tzara gufay. Or if you need that hammer, you needed the place where the hammer was. Somebody left the hammer on the table, and you want to have a meal on the table. Or if you left the hammer on a chair, and you need that chair, so then you would be allowed to move that hammer. So that's the first way. That's simple. Another heter is called graf shel rei. So graf shel rei, basically what it means is back then they didn't have bathrooms, so they used to go to the bathroom using a chamber pot, right, or something like that. So a chamber pot can get dirty, it could smell up the room. So therefore, the Chachamim said that even though it's legitimate Muktza, because there's absolutely nothing you can do with a chamber pot on Shabbos, but the Chachamim said since it's, again, and the reason why the Chachamim can do this is because the whole Muktza is midrabanan. So since the Muktza is midrabanan, the Rabbanan had the wherewithal to be able to tell you when Muktza does not apply. So they made a heter called graf shel rei, which is that when something is disgusting and it's bothering you, then you're allowed to move it away so that it's no longer disgusting to be in that room. So obviously the chamber pot is the first thing. right? Is that was the case that the Chachamim meant, but then a dirty diaper, right? That somehow is in the room, so then that would be able to Muktza, but it would be able to be moved because it's disgusting, right? So garbage, which may or may not be Muktza, which we've discussed, but even if you go with the opinions that say that garbage is Muktza, you'd still be able to take out the garbage if it's smelling up the room. That's one. Two is even if it's not smelling up the room, but you have no place to put your garbage is already full. So you want to take out the garbage, but meaning you need the place in the can for your new garbage. So you then in that scenario, you'd be allowed to move your old garbage out to the yard or wherever it is that you need to move it, so that you can have place to put your new garbage. Another example is dirty pots, right? So sometimes you have a dirty pot. Now, pots that are dirty, what are you going to do with it? First of all, is a pot, what type of muktza is a pot, right? So it would, if normally most pots are used for things that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, like cooking. So therefore, they would be considered muktza. Now, if you use a pot sometimes to cut up a salad or something like that, then it wouldn't be muktza, right? But if you have a dirty pot, so then even if you're going to say that pot is muktza, then you would be allowed to remove that pot. But not only that, if the pot is smelling, you're allowed to fill up that pot with water in order to get rid of the smell that the pot is making. I don't know if that would really get rid of it, but if you feel that it will, so then you'd be able to fill up the pot with water. Now, if you're only filling up the pot with water, not because it smells, but because you want to have an easier time cleaning that pot on Motzei Shabbos, that's not allowed, because that's called preparing for after Shabbos. So again, it's an example of where you can get a very technical reason, a technical difference in whether you're allowed to do something on Shabbos, right? Meaning, if you're filling up the pot because it smells, so then you're allowed to fill it up with water. If you're filling it up because you just want to be able to make it easier to clean it on Motzei Shabbos, then you would not be allowed to fill up the pot with water. Now, there would be maybe a scenario where you're not doing it to make it easier on Motzei Shabbos and to save time, but you're just doing it because it's going to be extremely difficult and it's going to maybe ruin the pan. So that's also not a problem, because you're just doing it so that the pan, I don't know what the scenario would be of that it gets ruined, but basically the whole rule of preparing after Shabbos is if you're doing it to make Motzei Shabbos easier, then it's not allowed to be done. If you're doing it because of something on Shabbos, then it can be done, even if the end result will be that it'll be easier for you on Motzei Shabbos. That's okay, right? The same thing with cleaning up a table by Shalosh Shuddis. If you're cleaning the table because you want to save time on Motzei Shabbos, that's not allowed. If you're doing it because you want the table clean, so then that's fine. Okay, so there's a couple of questions here. If a wet towel is hanging on a door on Erev Shabbos, is the door a basis? No. We said that anything that's on the side, hanging on a side, is not going to make a basis. So hanging on the door is hanging on the side of the door, so then that will be okay. So what if you have clean pots on the counter from before Shabbos? This is actually a pretty common scenario, and then you didn't have time to put them away. So can you move it once it's dry? So those pots, if you only use those pots for cooking, then those pots are muktza. So then that would depend, right? That would depend on why you want those pots put away. If you need the counter space, so then this is called a kli shemalachti le'isser, right? So that's a utensil that you normally use for isser, but since you need the place where the utensil is, so then you would be allowed to put it away. The only way that maybe you wouldn't be allowed to put it away is if you absolutely don't need the place. Then maybe you would not be able to put it away, which then brings us to an interesting question. Can we say, so let's say somebody left a hammer or a cell phone or a pot, right, in the middle of the floor on Shabbos. So now you don't really need the spot on the floor because nobody's sitting there. So, but it just bothers you. It just bothers you that the pot is sitting in the middle of the kitchen or the living room or a hammer or anything like that, any type of muktza. So now, so the question becomes, can we say that since this pot is bothering me so much, it gets the status of a graf shalrei, it gets the status of something that's disgusting, and therefore it would be, you're allowed to move it because it's really disgusting you and bothering you. So yes, there are opinions that say you would be able to move it because it's really disgusting you of where it is. I would say it's better to move it in the some of the ways that we're about to discuss, and then you don't have that issue. Yeah, so then, okay, so your following up question with the pot on the counter, should you not put them there before Shabbos if you know you're going to need the place on Shabbos? So it's tough to say that you're mechuyev to do this, to be proactive and do this before Shabbos, but it certainly would be better to not rely on moving this muktza lichatchila. Meaning, even though it's a utensil and you're allowed to move a utensil if you need the place, but really it should not. I mean, it gets into the disagreement with whether you're required to, if you have a hammer sitting next to you in the dining room, let's say, and you want to break open a nut, but you have a nutcracker in the kitchen. So are you required to get up and get the nutcracker from the kitchen or just get the hammer? So there, many persons can say you should get up and get the nutcracker from the kitchen because why rely on moving muktza? But Rabbi Feinstein, his understanding is that you're not required to go to your neighbor to get a nutcracker. Right, so meaning you have to weigh how big a headache it is in order to avoid moving the muktza. So, but in this case, if you know that you're constantly leaving pots in your kitchen, on your counter, and you have to move them on Shabbos, then yes, it would definitely be better to move them before Shabbos to not come on to moving the muktza. The dishes are not muktza, so there's another question here. The dishes are not muktza. So the dish rack, so dishes are not muktza, so that you can move. That's not an issue. It's only pots. Pots are more of an issue because they're muktza, right? Even though the muktza of pots is a little bit debatable. Yeah, can you theoretically have a problem of boirer? Yes, you can theoretically have a problem of boirer when putting them away too. You'd have to put them away with the proper Hilchos boirer, which would be whatever you pick up first, and then putting it away. But that we did last year. I in the shiurim on the website if anybody wants to see that. But yes, you would have to be careful with boirer. Okay, so dishes are not muktza. Pots, big bowls are not muktza either because that can be used for salads or whatever it is. Pots is the only thing that's maybe muktza. And even pots, since they can be used for cold, for salad, etc., so then that's really not such it's muktza. We consider it muktza because most people are cooking with it, but yeah, certainly better to move them all before Shabbos if you can. Also, if you put the dirty pot in the dishwasher, there's a problem to move the dishwasher rack. That's an excellent question. We're going to discuss that in a couple of minutes. That would not be a problem, but we'll get to that. Okay, so again, so far the first heter we have for moving muktza is a kli shemalachta le'isser. We said you're allowed to move it for its place, or if you need it for another use. Okay, which again we've discussed that much more in depth before. Yeah, so okay, somebody else posted here that you want to wash a pot and you need it for put away leftovers in it. So then that's not muktza. That would be a use for something cold. And even if you would say it's muktza, since you're using it for a heter, so then that would be using a kli shemalachta le'isser for a tzarech heter. So therefore it's okay. Okay, so that's that. Now, so then again, so moving a muktza, a kli, that's allowed, and then a graf shalrei, if something's disgusting, you're allowed to move that too. Okay, then here the next part we get into, then one more muktza is, let's say the muktza ended up in your hand. You didn't have a heter to move it, but for whatever reason, the muktza ended up in your hand, right? Like somebody like either it could be in your hand. It's an interesting case. I don't know how common it is, but if you happen to have Muktza in your hand when Shabbos comes in, so now you're stuck with the Muktza in your hand, or you have money in your pocket, that would be a more common case. So now, but that's not really in your hand, so that's more lenient. But for whatever reason, if you had Muktza in your hand, do you have to drop it? So the Pais can say, no, you don't have to drop it. If the Muktza came into your hand, then you're allowed to walk with it to wherever it is that you want to put it. Even if you have to walk for a mile, 2 miles with it in your hand, assuming there's an Eruv, you would be allowed to continue holding it until you put it down. Some say that if you stop walking and you're resting, then you would be required to put it down. Okay, but it's not so common. But the bottom line is, for whatever reason, Muktza goes in like a child, puts something in your hand, something like that, and you look at it and it's Muktza, you don't have to just drop it. You can move it to wherever it is, and especially if somebody doesn't realize that something's Muktza, and then you realize that it is Muktza, you don't have to make a big scene of it, just take it out of the room and put it down someplace so they wouldn't be embarrassed. So a practical application of this that doesn't really come up so much nowadays, but if you brought there's a couple examples, one actually does come up, is let's say you brought a chicken to a Rav to show the Rav, to ask the Rav if the chicken is treif or not. And the Rav looks at the chicken and says the chicken is treif. So if it's treif, now it's Muktza, right? Unless you give it to animals. So but there's really nothing to do with it. So, but since it's already in your hand, then you'd be able to carry it or put it till you have a fine place to put it down. Or if somebody has a bedika cloth that they have to show to a rabbi, and once there, it's whether the rabbi says it's good or not good, but once it's in the hand, so then you're done with it, so now it's Muktza. So so the Rav will be able to take it once it's in his hand. He's allowed to take it to the garbage or whatever it is, and if he gives it back to you, you wouldn't have to drop it. You can still hold on to it. The moil who does a bris also has an issue, because that, like we discussed, a moil's knife is Muktza, because nobody would ever use it for anything other than a bris. So then once he puts it down, so now it's Muktza. So really what he should do, but I don't think it's possible because he has to bandage the baby, but he's supposed to try and keep it, some I think keep it around their neck and let it hang from their neck. But once they're done with the bris, and then it's Muktza, and really he shouldn't put it down. What he should do is continue carrying it till he can find a safe place, and then put it down, and then that's it. Then it wouldn't be able to be moved. Okay, that's not so common, but that's another scenario where it's mutter. Now we get into the most common cases of moving Muktza, and the first one is called tiltul min hatzad. Okay, that's the word that the Pais can use. Tiltul means carrying, min hatzad from the side. Basically, what tiltul min hatzad is that you're moving the Muktza indirectly. It's indirect movement of Muktza. So, for example, you wanted to move a hammer that's on your table, but you don't really need the place on the table, because otherwise you can just move the hammer regularly, right? So it's all like we said, somebody left a tool on the floor and it's embarrassing. So tiltul min hatzad would be that you can push it. Let's say you take a fork, so you don't touch it directly. What you do is you push it or you would pick it up. Gloves doesn't work because that's direct, even though that would make it indirect from the hands, right? But let's say you would take 2 forks or a spoon, and you pick up the Muktza that way and move it indirect, meaning you're not directly touching the Muktza. So that is allowed, but, and this is important, and this is where it gets technical, you're allowed to move that Muktza that way using something else, right? If the reason why you're moving it is for your own sake or for a sake of Shabbos. If you're moving it for the hammer's sake or for the Muktza's sake, then you're not allowed to move the Muktza that way, right? So again, using our example, it would have to depend on why you're moving the Muktza. If you're moving the Muktza because you're embarrassed, then that's debatable whether that's considered part of Shabbos. if you're moving the Muktza because you don't want it to get ruined, because people, let's say there's a crowd coming over and you need to get that Muktza out of there so it gets ruined, then you're moving that for the sake of the Muktza, and that would not be allowed to be moved using this indirect movement. Okay, so again, indirect movement is allowed of Muktza, of every type of Muktza, except if you're moving it for the sake of the Muktza. If you're moving it for the sake of the Muktza, then it's not allowed. So okay, so where does this come in? So the most practical application of this is when you get a package delivered on Shabbos, and you want to move it inside, either because you're afraid to get stolen, or it's going to rain, or people are going to get to it and step on it, etc., etc. So then, in that case, you're not moving it for your own sake, and you're not moving it for Shabbos' sake, moving it in for the Muktza's sake, in which case you would not be allowed to move the Muktza that way. Like, again, taking a stick and pushing it into the house would not be allowed, because you're moving it for the Muktza's sake. All right? Now, as we spoke about with the packages on Shabbos, if the package is not Muktza, then you're allowed to bring it in. That's not a problem. Nowadays, especially, you'd be allowed to bring it in, and you'd even be allowed to use it if it's not Muktza on Shabbos. Right? And that's because in the old days, meaning in the Shulchan Aruch's times, and the Shulchan Aruch says that if a guy brings a package for you on Shabbos, you're not allowed to bring it in. That's because the guy was bringing it for you specifically. So the guy was working on your behalf. Nowadays, when it's either Amazon or UPS or FedEx or the Post Service, they're not working for you. They're working for themselves. And since they're working for themselves, that's not called a guy working on behalf of a Yid, and therefore you'd be allowed to not only bring it in, but even use it if necessary. Right? You have to make sure the way you open the package is done properly, but you'd be able to use it. Okay. So again, but if it's Muktza and you're bringing it in, and like we said, Muktza could be, if it's items that you might return, then those, even if it's clothing, that's Muktza, because since you don't want them to get ruined, you're not going to treat them like the way you do regular clothing. So you might end up returning it, and you don't want to take a loss. Therefore, that's considered Muktza. So anything that you're returning is considered Muktza, as would be with trying on gowns that you're afraid that it's going to get ruined. Those would also be Muktza, right? So so somebody just asked about the issue of the package coming from outside the Tchum. So that's also that issue, really, according to most poskim, is not an issue if the guy is bringing it for himself from out of the Tchum. It's only if he's bringing it for you out of the Tchum. There are those that disagree, but the majority of poskim say that if he's bringing it for himself from out of the Tchum, then that's not an issue. And here he's bringing it for himself, because if he doesn't bring those packages, he's going to get fired. He doesn't care who the person who the recipient is, and so therefore it's not going to make it usher if he's bringing it for himself, even if it's from out of the Tchum, which a lot of times, anyways, it's from inside the Tchum, because they come. I mean, it obviously depends on how many days it was shipped, but if you track the shipping, a lot of times it's within the Tchum. We consider the whole New York City within the Tchum, so it's really part of the Tchum from even before. But even if not, he's working for himself, bringing it from out of the Tchum. That's what most places can say. Okay, so, and this is very negay Yom Tif. Certainly, according to all opinions, if a package gets delivered on the first day Yom Tif, second day Yom Tif, you're allowed to use it if it's not Muktza, because second day Yom Tif is considered a different day. So again, if a package comes on first day Yom Tif, then second day Yom Tif, you're allowed to 100% use that clothing. That there's nobody that would argue on that. But even without them, most probably would say even on the first day Yom Tif and Shabbos, you'd be allowed to use it. It's interesting because this shows you where some of our contemporary issues that go away when you have an Eruv. So one of the things the place can say is that if the mail delivery person is giving it to you, So then you shouldn't take it directly from their hand because they're picking it up in public property and they're giving it to you and you're putting it down. So that means you're doing a half of an issur because it started off in public and now it's ended in private. So that whole halacha is totally, that halacha changed because we're all in an Eruv. So once we're in an Eruv, you're allowed to take it directly from the guy, right? Is it not in the spirit of Yom Tov Shabbos to open the package? I don't know why. I can hear what you're saying, that it's not in the spirit, but if it's mutter and it's covered for Yom Tov and for Shabbos, so then why not? Why not? Now, if it's not something that's meant to be used for Yom Tov or Shabbos, that's something else. But if it's something that's going to enhance the Yom Tov and Shabbos, so then if it happened to have been delivered, then that would be okay. Now, by the way, you should not make a order on Erev Yom Tov specifically because you want it to come on Yom Tov and use it. That's certainly not in the spirit of Yom Tov, and it's not right to do that because you're specifically asking a non-Jew to do the work. If it happened, then it's okay. You should not lechatchila do it. And this is a common question because you have the automatic 2-day, you have the 2-day delivery with Amazon. So the place can say, I've spoken to Poskim about this. They say if it's the default shipping that's going to end up delivering to you on Shabbos, that's fine. You shouldn't ask them specifically. Like let's say you have the Amazon that they're going to deliver it in 2 days. You shouldn't ask them to deliver it in 1 day. But if that's the default, and on Thursday you place an order on Amazon, it says it's going to come on Shabbos, then that you're allowed to keep because that's the default. That's the default shipping. Okay. So now I asked him about ripping letters. L'chatchila, one should not rip letters when opening a package. B'diavad, if you rip the letters, it's fine. So a package with tape can really be opened. That's not really an issue. That gets into the whole opening packages sugya, which is extremely I don't know. It's complicated, very technical. But those boxes were boxes before Shabbos. So by ripping off the tape, and when you rip off the tape, so if you're not ripping words, you're really not doing anything. You're not making a box. The box was there before Shabbos. Okay, but that's a whole different sugya. So just trying to stay back on the topic here. So if the box is Muktza and you want to bring it in on Shabbos, so the first way that we're discussing here of tiltum and atzad is not allowed. You are not allowed to move Muktza from the side or indirect. That's what we'll call it. We'll call indirect movement of Muktza if it's doing it for the sake of the Muktza. If you're doing it for your sake or for the sake of Shabbos, then it's allowed. All right. So if you have something Muktza on your dining room table and it's not a utensil, let's call it that's not a utensil. So therefore, it does not have the heter of moving a utensil for the place, right? So let's say it's a rock. So a rock is not a utensil. So somebody left a rock on the table. So that's called moving it for Shabbos' sake. So then you'd be allowed to take the rock in a spoon, like push the rock onto the spoon and move it, right? Or if somebody delivers a big box that's sitting right in your front door and nobody could get in, so then it's because of a tzarich Shabbos. So then you'd be allowed to take a stick and push the package to the side. But if the package is, the only reason why you're moving the package inside the house is because you don't want it to get stolen, and you're not allowed to use it, you're not allowed to push it with something else, like with a fork or with a stick, or something like that. That would not be allowed. Okay, because that's called tiltum and atzad. Fine, now we leave the best for last. There's something called tiltum begufay, which is the most lenient. Tilta begufa means you're moving it with your body, with a part of your body other than your hand. You're allowed to move any muktza, according to the Mishnah Brura, you're allowed to move any muktza for any reason with a part of your body that's not the normal way to move it, which just basically, for most muksas, means your hands. So again, using our example, if you have a muksa, you had something muksa delivered onto your porch and you need it to be moved inside because you don't want it to get stolen. So we said, there you're not allowed to move it with a stick or a spoon or anything like that. However, you are allowed to kick it. Since kicking is not the regular way to move muksa, then that's called tiltul begufa. You're moving it with your body, but not the hands of your body. So therefore, you would be allowed to kick in the muktza. Now, you may not want to kick too hard because it may break the muktza. So you can kick it slowly and you push it in. And the reason why that's mutter is because that's an abnormal way of moving your muktza, right? So therefore, you're allowed to move any muktza for any reason. Yes, you can kick in a box for somebody not home for Shabbos. If it's not muktza, then you can actually pick it up. But if it's muktza, you're not sure what it is, so then yes, you can kick it in. And I'm assuming that it's within an eruv, then it would be allowed. So again, so that middle case that we said, the tiltul min atzad, moving it indirectly, is not really so nageya, because what you can do, is you don't have to come on to moving it from the side. Just kick it. Or what you can do is move it with your elbows if you don't want to kick it. You just can't use it with your hands. Using the back of your hands, like moving it like this, would also not be advisable. So you just have to move it in a different way, and then with your body, then you're okay. Now, the reason why some say not to do it that way is the Chazon Ish is of the opinion that when the Gemara says you're allowed to kick it, or when the Rishonim say you're allowed to kick the muktza, you're only allowed to kick it if it's in your way, meaning as you walk into the door, if you happen to kick the muktza, or the muktza is in your way, so then you can kick it forward into the house, right? But if it's not in your way, then the Chazon Ish says you cannot go out of your way and kick it. That the Chazon Ish's chumrah most do not go with, which is the way we're saying it here. We go with the Mishnah Brura, and then you would be able to kick your muktza or move your muktza with your elbows or your teeth, or to blow muktza. You can blow muktza too. I don't know what scenario that would be, but you would be allowed to move it in all these type of scenarios. So that's basically, yes, this goes for any muktza. You're allowed to move with your body. Okay, now again, there is a Chazon Ish that says you're only allowed to move it if it's in your way. So I wouldn't say that you should just go moving muktza randomly on Shabbos just for your kicks, because the Chazon Ish is the Chazon Ish. But bottom line is, if there's any sort of tzarech, any sort of need to move that muktza, it can cause somebody a lot of stress. You don't want to sit on your porch a whole Shabbos afternoon watching your muktza package, because you don't want to kick it in. You just kick it in. But, we rely on the Mishnah Brura's opinion that says that moving muktza for whatever reason is allowed if you do it with your body. Okay. Now there is a scenario where if the regular way to move that muktza is by kicking it, then it's not allowed, because that's not done with a shina. Meaning the whole point of this moving the muktza is you're doing it differently than the normal way of moving it. Right? So kicking muktza is not the way you would normally bring in a package. So that's why kicking it is allowed. But let's say a ball. So according to some opinions, a ball is muktza. We don't paskin like that. But a ball would be muktza on Shabbos. Again, according to the opinions that say that a ball is muktza on Shabbos, so a ball a lot of times gets kicked. That's the way you move it. So if that's the case, and you were going with those opinions, you would not be allowed to kick a ball into the house on Shabbos, because that's the regular derech. In that case, maybe you can pick it up, but I think it's a regular way of moving the ball is also to pick it up. So you can have multiple ways that would be considered regular. So maybe moving it with your elbows in that case would be okay, because that's an abnormal way of moving the muktza. Yes, if you get a wedding invitation, which is muktza, and you want to see who invited you, so yes, you'd be able to kick it over, or to move it with your feet to see who it is. So again, I just want to reiterate that muktza, all muktzas can be moved using an indirect movement, but that's only using indirect movement is only allowed if it's for a Shabbos need, right? But if it's for the sake of the muktza, then it's not allowed. If it's for the sake of the muktza, then what you would do is rely on the shinoi, which we say tiltul begufa, and then it's okay. So a common example, right? So a common example is sweeping. Why are you allowed to sweep the floor on Shabbos, right? the dirt is muktzah. You don't plan on doing anything with that dirt. So why are you allowed to sweep? Okay, so you tell this to men, they'll say, great, then we got a new chumrah. We can't sweep because we're, it's muktza. That's a nice try, but it's not going to fly. The reason why you're allowed to sweep is because you're moving the muktza indirectly. You're moving it with a broom, right? So it's an indirect movement of muktza, and it's for Shabbos. And it's for Shabbos because you want your house to be clean. So since you want your house to be clean, so therefore you're allowed to move the muktza with the broom. To pick up muktza with your hands and move it, again, you have a different heter, would maybe if it's considered disgusting, but not always is food on, I don't know, food on the floor might be disgusting, but just dirt on the floor may not necessarily be being allowed. Yeah. Wiping down a table with your hand. I'll get back to the other questions in a minute, but wiping down a table with your hand, it would really depend. If it's muktza, like sunflower seeds, the shells or something like that, that's really muktza. So in that case, if it's disgusting and it's disgusting to you, then you're allowed to move it in the regular way. But if it's really not disgusting for you, then it really would be better if you used a knife or something, or another utensil, a brush or something like that, to move the muktza. But again, or a napkin. A napkin would be, napkin maybe not. Depends how you, if the napkin is just covering your hand using as a glove, then that wouldn't be. I would say that you should use like the example the place can use is like a knife. You take the knife and you scrape the table with it. But again, if it's disgusting, so then that's graf shorei, you're allowed to move it regularly. If it's not disgusting, you just want it to be clean, so then it would depend. If it's crumbs that nobody would ever eat, then it's muktza. If it's crumbs that maybe sometimes people like to gather the crumbs and put into the soup, then it's not muktza. So you'd have to use your judgment. But theoretically, if it would be muktza, then your way to do it, because since it's a tzarich for Shabbos, you're allowed to use it. You're allowed to use a knife because that's indirect movement. Worst comes to worst, you could blow it off, right? Like that would be an example of blowing it off. Or you can try and move it with your elbow, or try and, stand on the table and move it with your feet. That would also be okay. I'm not so sure I would advise doing that, but that's what it would be. So again, just to chazer over, if you're moving muktza indirect, then it would have to be for the muktza's sake. I'm sorry, not for the muktza's sake. It would have to be for Shabbos' sake, then you could move it that way. If it's not for Shabbos' sake, then you could move it with parts of the body that you don't normally use to move the muktza. So again, kicking it is obviously the easiest way. Moving it with your elbows, teeth would also be okay. So that's yes, you'd put the knife and you'd let it go onto a plate, because that's moving the muktza indirectly. You're moving the muktza indirectly, right? So again, getting back to another example, getting back to what we discussed last week. So let's say you have a candelabra on top of the table, right? And then again, if the candelabra makes the whole table muktza, then you can't move the table. But if you want the candelabra, if the candelabra is on the table, did not make the table muktza because you had other things on the table. So since you had other things on the table's not muktza. So then when you move that table, you're moving the table indirect. You're moving the muktza indirectly. So therefore, that would be allowed, but it would depend why. See, if you're moving the table because you don't want the candelabra to be in the room because you're afraid it'll get ruined, let's say you're making a kiddush or something like that, so then moving the table for that reason would not be allowed. But if you're moving it for a Shabbos reason, it's like you need the table someplace else, then even though you're moving the muktza, that would be okay. So basically, I hope I'm being clear here. It's all based on what your intention is with what you're moving the muktza. So the Pais could even say that, let's say there's a room that's dark and you want to be able to move your candelabra, your lichter, into that room so that you could read in there on Shabbos. The Pais can say that would be allowed by moving the entire table, because you're moving the table, you're moving the muktza, but you're moving it indirectly, but you're moving it for a Shabbos, for a Shabbos reason for Shabbos. And then many Pais can say that would be allowed. Okay, so but again, the go-to most lenient situation is to move the muktza with a shina, and then that would be okay. Okay, let me just answer some of these questions, and then we'll stop. If you're not sure what's in the package, you have to treat it as muktza l'chumra. If you really don't know what it is, then I would say, yeah, it's better to consider it. It's better to consider it muktza. But usually most people remember if they actually ordered muktza. Most things I think they order are not muktza, but if you're not sure, then you should treat it l'chumra. If you want to feed birds after Shabbos, can you gather the crumbs? You can do it. If you do it, you shouldn't do it with your hands directly. It would be better if you do it with using a knife or something like that, and then it would be okay. So moving right hand and left hand, it really depends on if you never ever use it with your left hand, but most people do use a left hand, even if they're strictly a righty, but most people will use the left hand at some point. So it's better not to consider the left hand of the shina. Okay, so is there a problem opening and closing a garbage drawer? I think we addressed it last week. So there are many poskim that have an issue with opening and closing a garbage drawer. So, but we said it really depends. If that garbage drawer was empty before Shabbos, then it's going to be okay. If it was not empty and was full of garbage from the beginning of Shabbos, then it's you really shouldn't move it. So what you can do, we said a simple eitzah is to leave an empty garbage bag, even folded up in the drawer, because then that's worth more than the garbage, and then you're okay. As assuming that you're not moving the garbage in there specifically for the garbage, which you're not, because then it's indirect movement of the garbage. Or you can just put a can of tuna fish in there and just leave it there. I had a friend that actually, I think, glued a can of tuna fish to the bottom of the drawer. Now, I don't know if that has an expiration date and he has to change it. I don't know, but they last a good couple of years. So then that would be okay too. Okay, so just a reminder, if you can email ejacobs@hank.org. Thank you again for doing that. We can have the emails. Hopefully, we'll be able to be in communication, and then people can make suggestions for what subject we should do. So muktza on a freezer door. You don't have to make yourself. You don't have to make yourself crazy, right? So we said that the muktza door will not become muktza on the door ultimately will not become muktza, and you're allowed to open the doors. Why? That's complicated. Why the person said that it's okay, but basically what it's saying is that the door is not meant to hold muktza. It's really meant to be the door that you need. So therefore it'll be okay. Now, can you push down the garbage to make more room? Yes, because that would go under the category of graf shorei, since it's disgusting and you need a place for the garbage. So then you'd be allowed to push down the garbage the same way that you're allowed to remove garbage in order to make place for other garbage. So again, I hope we're being clear here. Before we sign off, just to review. So it's graf shorei. If something's disgusting, you're allowed to move it regularly. If not, you're allowed to move the muktza indirectly, but then that has to be moving it indirectly, like pushing the muktza with a knife or a broom or something like that, is allowed if it's for the tzarech of Shabbos. If it's not for the tzarech of Shabbos and it's for the tzarech of the muktza, then the way you move it is by doing with a shinoi, either with kicking it or moving with your elbows or teeth or blowing it or something like that. Okay. One more question here. Yes, you can smash it even if it's going to bend the utensils, because you're not interested. You're not breaking them, you're just smashing them, and you're not interested in doing it for any sort of tikkun. So therefore, that would be okay to smash the muktza. Okay, I wish everybody well. Again, next week there will be no shir. I apologize about that. But everybody should have a good week and stay healthy. Well.